I'm Dave Epstein. Welcome to this edition of Growing Wisdom. And we want to talk about some of the things that you can do in the fall around your garden. And I'm spending some time on the evergreens today. Evergreens can be pruned in the fall because most of their growing has been done. Now, depending on where you live across the United States, you want to wait until the evergreens have slowed down their growth for the summer. So in the Northeast, that might be October. Further southeast, it might be November or even December. Same thing on the West Coast. Northern parts might be earlier in the season. Southern parts, wait a little while longer till it gets a little bit cooler. One of the things I'd like to start with today is this particular topiary. And topiaries continue to grow, so you have to prune them to keep their wonderful shape. This particular plant's been growing here all summer long, and if you look, it really has lost its unique look to it. So originally it has sort of two tiers to it. I am trying to grow a third tier. So in order to get that third tier, we're letting one of these leaders grow a little bit taller, and then as it gets tall enough, probably about a foot taller, I'll start to let this branch out to create another layer. So when you're pruning topiaries, fall's a great time to kind of reshape them because they're not going to grow very much more after this time of the year. All right, so we're going to start with this topiary as we talked about, and it's really tough in here. It's very weedy, so we've got to get into the topiary area. So here's the topiary, and what I want you to notice is that this particular leader here is what I'm going to let grow to the next level. So my goal here is that we have one tier here, another one down underneath, and we're going to let this eventually grow up and create a third tier. I want this to be about this high at maturity. But what I have to do is kind of prune back all this stuff to really let this stand out. And as we talked about, what you want to do is you really just want to start cutting and think about keeping this at a nice even level. Remember, you can always cut more. You can't put this back on. Depending on the time of year you're pruning, you could use these greens inside. So let's say that you decide to prune later in the year, around Thanksgiving or Christmas, you can actually take these greens and put them inside and use them as decoration. If you're pruning earlier in the year, put them in the compost pile. Remember, our goal is to leave this guy. I want this to come up and then create this new tier. You can see that down here, if you look closely, see how there's this nice stalk here, it's nice and thick. This eventually is going to do the same thing. Here's something you want to be careful of. If you prune too early, you'll begin to get a little bit of new growth. So let's say that it's still fairly warm and you prune. That new growth is susceptible to getting hit by frost or freeze later on in the season. So you really want to wait until your plants have what we call hardened off. Wait till you have a few hard freezes before you start to prune. And again, that depends on exactly where you are in the country. So I'm just shaping this into whatever shape I want. Now you could do round, you can do square. If you're really creative, you could do a giraffe, but I'm just going to do sort of a roundish ball here. I don't have many elements like this in the garden, and that's why I think, for me, this works. Some people might not like any elements like this in the garden, but because this garden is so informal and has so many things going on, I like to have one unique, something a little more formal than we have in the rest of the garden. You'll get the idea. Eventually, this is going to be the next tier, and we'll let that grow, and that will create the other topiary. You can kind of see what I'm doing at this point. So somebody may look at that and say, why didn't you prune that piece off? And I'd have to explain to them what I'm trying to do, but this is going to take a little while. This is a multi-year project, but eventually I think that's going to have a nice top tier to it. It's going to take a little while to let it happen, but I have the patience. And that's why some of these are so expensive, because think about what I'm doing and how long this is taking. So if you buy this with a third tier and you think, why is this so expensive? That's one of the reasons why. So here we are at this weeping larch, and right now it's only about 5 feet tall. I want it a little bit taller. So see this leader here, and you can do this with any weeping plant. You take this and we're slowly going to bring it up here like that. Now what will happen is, if I secure this like that, right, what will happen is eventually this will start weeping, and now I've got a taller plant. One of the things I want to recommend is whenever you stake plants, whether it's an annual or perennial, try not to use something that could cut the plant if you get a lot of wind. So I've got something here which has a little bit of give. It's very smooth. If the plant starts to sway, I'm not going to cut it, and that's real important. What's going to happen is this will start to weep here, And then eventually this will also start to weep. So now, instead of having a 5-foot tree, I have a tree that's a little over 6 feet, and eventually this will create a bigger area of this beautiful green weeping structure in the garden, and I'm gonna like that, so that's what we're gonna do. I don't think I want it any higher than this, but if you did, you can get another stake. You go up 8, 10, 12 feet, whatever your choice. We also talked about pruning other things like Japanese holly. So here's a Japanese holly here. We've gotten a pair of hand shears. I like to use these a little better than the pruning shears because this area is a little larger, so this would just take me a longer time, but same rules apply. Figure out what shape you want, and then step back, look, step back, look. You want to continue to do that because if you stay on top of this and prune too closely without stepping back, you run the risk of making a mistake. So you can see this looks a lot better now. We've sort of got this nice curved little wall here, and that's one of the things I've been going for. It hides the fence back there a little bit. And just another example of pruning later on in fall. So what have we talked about today? We've talked about a couple of things. We've talked about pruning to create a topiary. We've talked about general pruning, and earlier we talked about how to train some of those weeping plants to make them grow a little bit higher. So remember, pruning encourages new growth. So one of the things you've got to be careful of when you're pruning is the fact that this will flush out some new growth. If it's too early in the season, you'll get new growth. And if you're close to frost time, that new growth runs the risk of being damaged by the frost. So you want to either do this much earlier or, as we suggested, wait until after you have some cold weather or wait until later on in the season when things have stopped growing, and that really will help the plant. So remember, if you live in one of those zones where it gets quite cold in the winter, you want to wait until the plant has stopped growing, you've had some of that colder weather before you prune. Come back every week for all of our videos here at Growing Wisdom.